The Distance North, a story of two losses in one morning, one dog named Overture and the lake that stopped the clock. You can't rebuild on the same foundation that cracked. You have to find new ground. That's not giving up. That's the whole point. Part 1. The Cardboard Box. The morning it happened was clear. That's what I remember most, because clarity felt like an insult. The kind of day that should belong to something worth having: a long drive with the windows down, a first cup of coffee on the right porch, a phone call you've been looking forward to. Instead, it belonged to a security badge surrendered on the 41st floor of a building I had spent 7 years walking into with something that had at least resembled purpose. My name is James Calloway. I'm 38 years old. I was until 11:47 on a Tuesday morning in late October the Director of Product Development at Kelmore Systems, a mid-sized software company in Portland, Oregon that had been, for the preceding 18 months, quietly dismantling itself from the inside out through a combination of financial mismanagement, executive overreach, and the specific corporate cowardice of people who had decided to protect their own positions rather than the company they were supposedly running. The HR director was a woman named Gloria, who had always been kind to me and who delivered the news with the specific contained quality of someone performing a difficult task while managing their own discomfort about performing it. She told me that my position was being eliminated as part of a restructuring necessitated by the SEC investigation into the options backdating scheme. She told me I would receive 3 months of severance. She told me that IT had already disabled my network access, but that she had arranged for me to have 30 minutes with my laptop to retrieve any personal files before the company device was collected. I thanked her. I spent the 30 minutes doing something I had been thinking about doing for 4 months. I copied my personal development notebooks, 3 years of product concepts and strategic frameworks that I had been keeping off the company network ever since I noticed that my ideas had a habit of appearing in senior management's presentations without my name attached to them onto a personal drive that I kept in my jacket pocket. Then I returned to the laptop, collected the cardboard box that my desk contents had been placed in by an administrative assistant who had the grace to look embarrassed while doing it, and rode the elevator down 41 floors in the company of a security officer named Marcus, who I had exchanged weather opinions with for 7 years and who now looked at a point slightly above my head for the entire descent. In the parking garage, I loaded the box into my car. The automated gate arm lifted. I drove out into the Tuesday that was entirely unaware of what had just happened to me. I was home in 22 minutes. Normal traffic, normal radio. I turned it off halfway through the drive because whatever was playing felt wrong. Rebecca's car was in the parking space designated for visitors, which meant she was home, which meant she was not at the design agency where she worked as a senior art director, which meant something was different from what she had told me this morning when I kissed her goodbye at 7:15 and she said, "Have a good day," and I said, "I'll call you around noon," and she said, "Sounds good," and neither of us had any idea that noon was going to look the way it did. I took the box upstairs, keys on the hook, jacket on the chair. I was thinking about what to say, how to arrange the words around the fact of what had happened so that they would land with the weight they deserved without becoming something she would need to manage on my behalf. I didn't get to arrange the words. The sounds were coming from the bedroom, muffled, unmistakable. The specific acoustic signature of something that requires no interpretation once you've heard it. I stood in the hallway for approximately 12 seconds. In those 12 seconds, operating with the mechanical precision of a mind that had been asked to process too much information too quickly and had defaulted to pure observation, I compiled the following inventory. Rebecca's shoes, black-heeled boots placed neatly by the bedroom door. She always lined her shoes up when she took them off, a habit she had from childhood that I had always found charming, and that now produced in me a specific quality of nausea. A suit jacket on the chair in the hallway. dark charcoal tailored, not mine. The lapel had a small monogrammed pin, EC, not initials I recognized. 2 glasses of red wine on the nightstand, visible through the partially open door. It was 11:50 in the morning. And then the sounds continued, and I understood the complete picture without needing to open the door further. I set the cardboard box down in the hallway. I walked to the kitchen. I opened the refrigerator. There was leftover Thai food from Monday and a bottle of sparkling water and a 6-pack of beer that I had been saving for the weekend. I took one of the beers. I closed the refrigerator. I sat at the kitchen island, opened the beer and waited. It took 9 minutes. I know because I was watching the clock above the stove, and the watching of the clock was the only thing available to me that did not require me to feel anything. 9 minutes. Then footsteps, then the specific quality of a hallway conversation conducted in urgent whispers by 2 people who have just understood that their situation has changed. Rebecca appeared in the kitchen doorway first. She was wearing my bathrobe. I had bought it 3 years ago at a hotel boutique in Ashland after a weekend theatre trip that had been one of the better weekends of our relationship, and she had adopted it as hers. Over the years, with the casual possession that people in long relationships extend to comfortable objects. She was wearing it now, and her expression was not what I had expected. I had expected guilt, or perhaps fear, or even the particular complex blankness of someone who has been caught doing something they knew was wrong and is now engaged in the real-time calculation of consequence and damage control. What I saw instead was frustration, a quality of irritation. The expression of a person who has been interrupted in the middle of something and has not yet recalibrated to the appropriate response for the circumstances. "James," she said. "Yeah," I said. "Why are you home?" Not "I'm so sorry," not "this is not what it looks like," not even "let me explain." Just the question, the assumption that the question was available to her, that she had the standing to ask it. "I got fired," I said. My voice came out with the flat quality of a man reading from a document he has not written. "They eliminated my position this morning. The options backdating investigation. They needed to cut costs." I took a sip of beer. Where else would I go? She opened her mouth, closed it. Something moved across her face, the first real emotion I had seen, and it was not what either of us had been trained to expect from each other in difficult moments. It was not softness. It was the specific look of a person recalculating a situation they thought they had controlled. The man appeared behind her in the hallway. Ethan Corso. EC, the monogrammed pin, made sudden sense. He was the creative director at Rebecca's agency, her professional superior, the man she had described in approximately 40 conversations over the past 2 years as brilliant and exacting and occasionally infuriating. He was 44, well-dressed even in his current partial state of redressing, and he had the look of a man who understood with a precision that came from having been in difficult situations before that there was nothing useful for him to say. "You need to go," I said to him. I kept my voice even. I was thinking abstractly about the security officer Marcus in the elevator, about the particular dignity of a person who performs an unpleasant task without making it worse by making it personal. "Get your jacket from the hallway. Take the elevator. You don't need to say anything." Ethan looked at Rebecca. Rebecca looked at me. I looked at the clock above the stove. "I'll call you," Rebecca said to him. "No," I said before either of them could add anything to that. "You won't. Not from this apartment." I set the beer down. "Leave the key card for the building on the counter when you go, Rebecca. You can reach me through my attorney to arrange retrieval of your belongings." She flinched, not at the words I think, but at the absence of what she had expected from them, the anger, the accusation, the scene that would have given her something to respond to, something to deflect or argue with. The flatness was what she couldn't process, because the flatness was not a performance, it was what was actually there. Ethan left without speaking. His footsteps down the hallway, the sound of the elevator, the building settling around the departure. Rebecca stood in the kitchen doorway for a long moment. She was, by most reckonings, a beautiful woman 35 years old, with the specific quality of presence that certain people carry, the sense that a room has been rearranged around them by the simple fact of their arrival. I had loved that quality once. Now it registered as information. 5 years, she said finally. Not as an accusation, almost as a notation. Yes, I said. James. Oh. Eagle. You can leave the key card on the counter, I said. I'll have whatever I owe you in the joint account by Friday. My attorney's name is Patricia Walsh. She handles family matters. I already had Patricia's number in my phone. I had looked her up 4 months ago when I had noticed the particular quality of Rebecca's attention shifting in ways that I had recognized but had not wanted to name. I had not called Patricia then because I had been hoping to be wrong. I had been right. Being right was not as useful as I had expected. Rebecca put the key card on the counter. She went to the bedroom. She came back dressed. She looked at me once more from the kitchen doorway with the expression of someone who has something to say and has decided correctly that this is not the moment to say it. Then she left. The front door closed. I sat at the kitchen island with my beer and looked at the key card on the counter and thought about 7 years of walking into a building that had just fired me and 5 years of walking into an apartment with a woman who had just walked out of it, and the specific coincidence of losing both on the same Tuesday morning in October, and whether there was any version of that coincidence that made sense. I concluded there was not. Then I went to the bedroom, stripped all the bedding, bagged it, and carried it to the building's dumpster. Egyptian cotton high thread count, Rebecca's preference. Gone. Then I came back upstairs and finished my beer. Then I started packing. Part 2. The shaving detail. I need to stop here and tell you something, because it is the thing that I have replayed the most often in the 18 months since that morning, more than the sounds through the door, more than her first question, more than the specific quality of her face when she came to the kitchen doorway. When I was stripping the bedding, I noticed something in the bathroom. The shaving kit. Not mine, hers. The specific products Rebecca used for the personal grooming that she maintained as a matter of preference and occasional variation, the kind of thing that 5 years of intimacy makes familiar in the way that all domestic knowledge becomes familiar. She had shaved completely, something she had not done for me not once in 5 years together, and something I noticed with the cold inventory of a person whose emotional processing has been suspended in favor of simple observation that she had apparently maintained for however long this had been happening with Ethan Corso. That detail, more than the sounds, more than the keycard, more than the first question, was the one that finally moved through the flat effect and reached something underneath it. Not anger, not grief, something more specific. The recognition that the relationship I had been living in was in a fundamental way not the relationship she had been living in, that we had been occupying the same apartment and the same calendar and the same social calendar and the same bed for 5 years, and she had been somewhere else in her attention and her desire and her effort, directing those things towards someone else for a period of time I would probably never know exactly, and I had been present, consistent, paying attention to the version of her she offered, and not the version she was apparently being elsewhere. I want to be fair. I am not a perfect person. I worked long hours. I had, over the preceding 18 months of the company's slow unraveling, been preoccupied in ways that pulled me out of full presence even when I was physically there. I had missed dinners, cancelled plans, been the person in a relationship who treated his own tiredness as a condition that excused him from full engagement. These were my failures, and they were real. But they did not explain the shaving kit. They did not explain Ethan Corso's jacket in the hallway. They did not explain the first question. What they explained was the distance. The specific domestic long-accumulated distance that had been growing between us for at least 2 years that I had named as stress and she had apparently named as something she needed to find elsewhere. I understand now that distance in a relationship is rarely one person's fault and rarely one person's solution. I owned my portion of the distance. What she did with her portion was her choice, and her choice had consequences. That was the thing I carried north in the car the following morning. Part 3, North. I left at 6 in the morning on a Wednesday. I had spent Tuesday in the apartment doing the following things in roughly this order, calling Patricia Walsh, who was available and who listened to the complete version and said, "Bring me what you have on Thursday and we will proceed correctly," calling my bank and separating my personal account from the joint account we had maintained for household expenses, sending Rebecca a text through Patricia's recommended channel that said all future communication should go through Patricia Walsh, whose number is attached, eating a bowl of cereal, standing at the kitchen counter because the kitchen table felt wrong, not sleeping. At 5:30 Wednesday morning, I got up, made coffee in the French press, poured it into a travel mug, loaded my hiking pack and a duffel of clothing into my car and drove north. I want to be specific about the north because it was not random and it was not a plan. It was an instinct, the specific geographical expression of needing to be in a different place, a place without any of the associations that Portland carried, which at that moment was every building on every block within the radius of my life. North meant the Coast Range and then the peninsula, and then eventually, if you kept going, the places where the road thinned and the population thinned and the specific density of other people's lives thinned with them, until you could be in a landscape that was not about you or about anything you had built or lost. I drove for 6 hours. I stopped once for gas and once for a breakfast sandwich at a diner outside Astoria, where the waitress called me honey without irony and refilled my coffee without being asked. I sat at the counter and ate my breakfast sandwich and watched the diner function, the short order cook and the waitress and the 2 farmers at the corner table and the old man reading a physical newspaper, and felt for the first time since 11:47 the previous day something that was not the flat processing of bad information, not happiness, not peace. Just the ordinary warmth of a room full of people doing ordinary things. I drove north from Astoria into the Washington coast. The trees changed as you crossed to the Columbia, taller, denser, darker green, the Pacific Northwest forest asserting itself. The light went grey-green filtered. I drove without a destination for 2 more hours, taking smaller roads when I reached junctions, not doubling back, not choosing strategically, just continuing. Around noon on a gravel road that had been slowly losing confidence in itself for the past 15 miles, I passed a mailbox with a handwritten sign, Lake Property, caretaker position available, call Dale. I drove past it. Then I drove back and wrote down the number. I called Dale Whitmore that afternoon from a pullout overlooking a stretch of coastal forest. Dale was 63, retired from the timber industry, and the property in question was a lake cabin on 14 acres that had been in his family for 40 years and that he was finding increasingly difficult to maintain from his current residence in Bend. He needed someone to live there year-round, do basic maintenance, keep the property functional, and serve as a contact point for the occasional rental periods in summer. In exchange for the caretaker role, the cabin was available rent-free. "What's your situation?" Dale asked. "I just lost my job," I said, "and my apartment is going to be complicated for the next few months." He was quiet for a moment. "You got any maintenance skills?" "I can learn," I said. Another moment of quiet. "You seem honest," he said. "Come look at the place this weekend." I drove to the property that Saturday. The cabin was 3 miles off a county road at the end of a track that the trees had been slowly reclaiming for years. It was small, 800 square feet, a main room, a kitchen, a bedroom, a bathroom that had been functional until 2 months ago when the water heater failed. The deck faced west over the lake, which was a half-mile wide and surrounded on three sides by second-growth fir and hemlock, and the view from that deck was the specific kind of view that requires no improvement. I told Dale I would take it. I moved in the following Tuesday, exactly 1 week after the Tuesday that had ended my previous life. Part 4. What was found on the road. 3 days after moving into the lake cabin, I was driving the county road back from the hardware store in the nearest town, 12 miles away, a place with a gas station, a diner, a hardware store, and a tavern that doubled as the post office 3 mornings a week when I saw something on the shoulder. A cardboard box, small, the kind that copier paper comes in, sitting on the gravel with its lid slightly open. I slowed, pulled over, got out. Inside were 2 puppies and the remains of what had once been a third. The 2 alive were young, 8 weeks, maybe 10, and very cold. One was the grey and white mottled pattern of an Australian Shepherd mix. The other was predominantly black with 1 white ear and the brindle markings of something I couldn't identify. Both were quiet, in the specific way that animals get quiet when they have used up their available options and are simply waiting. I put them inside my jacket and drove to the vet in town, which was open for another 40 minutes. The vet, a woman named Dr. Sue Lynn Park, who had been practicing in that county for 22 years and who had the contained practical warmth of someone who had processed a great deal of difficulty without being diminished by it, looked at both puppies, assessed their condition, and told me they would probably be fine with warmth, food, and time. "What are you going to do with them?" she asked. I had not thought about this. I was living in a cabin that was not technically mine, working in a situation that was temporary, managing a legal proceeding 400 miles to the south, and sleeping on an air mattress until the furniture I had shipped arrived. I was not in an appropriate position to take on animals. "I'll take them," I said. The grey and white one I named Overture. The one with the white ear I named Coda. The logic was simple, and the naming required no explanation to anyone, because there was no one to explain it to. Overture, the beginning of something. Coda, the end that makes way for the beginning. I was, without quite saying so to myself, naming a period of my life. Overture and Coda moved into the lake cabin with me, and proceeded over the following weeks to make it considerably more alive than it had been. Part 5. The email. I had a professional contact named Nora Elgin. Nora and I had worked together briefly 7 years earlier at a small startup that had failed in the specific unglamorous way that most small startups fail, not dramatically, not with scandal, just by running out of money in a market that had moved on from the problem it was trying to solve. We had been on the same small team, had worked well together, had stayed in loose professional contact through the years, in the specific way that former colleagues do when they respect each other's work and have no particular reason to be closer. She had emailed me 3 days after I left Portland. She had heard about Kelmore's implosion through the industry network it had been in the trade press by then, the options scandal having become a public matter, and she wrote to say she was sorry to hear about my position and to let her know if she could be a reference. I wrote back from the lake cabin with the door open and Overture asleep on the kitchen floor and the sound of the lake through the screen. I told her where I was. I told her what had happened, not the full version, just the professional portion. I told her I was thinking about what came next and that I had some development notes I had been sitting on and that I was beginning to think the right move was to build something rather than find somewhere to work. She wrote back in an hour. She was in Seattle. She had left the startup world and had been running her own small consulting practice for 4 years. She was doing well, but was in the process of considering whether to expand and into what. She had a question: what were the development notes about? I told her, not in detail, but in outline. The framework I had been building in my notebooks for 3 years, a product architecture concept that I had believed in enough to hide from people who were stealing ideas, which is itself a form of belief. I described it as I had come to understand it through 3 years of parallel thinking alongside a job that had stopped taking me seriously. She wrote back, "Can we talk on the phone tomorrow?" We talked on the phone for 2 hours. That was the beginning of what would become Callaway Elgin Solutions, but I didn't know that yet. What I knew was that the call felt like the first conversation I had fully inhabited in a long time present specific going somewhere useful between two people who were both saying what they actually thought. Part 6. The things that happened in between. Rebecca attempted contact through Patricia Walsh in November. Her position, as relayed through her attorney, was that she wanted a mediated settlement of the joint assets rather than a formal proceeding. Patricia advised me that this was a reasonable approach and that the mediated route would be faster and less expensive. What Rebecca wanted the apartment on the grounds that she had contributed to the renovation costs over the past 3 years and had established it as her primary professional environment for her freelance design work. What I wanted the apartment on the grounds that I had held the lease for 7 years before her arrival and had been the primary financial contributor throughout. What actually happened after 2 mediation sessions, during which I drove to Portland, stayed at a hotel, and sat across a table from Rebecca and Ethan Corso, who appeared with what I thought was a complete absence of self-awareness as her support person for the second session, the matter was resolved as follows. Rebecca kept the apartment. I kept the development notebooks. The joint account was divided evenly. We each took back the furniture we had arrived with. I have been asked whether seeing Ethan Corso at the mediation sessions was difficult. The honest answer is that it was clarifying. He was present professional and looked at me with the specific expression of a man who has decided that the best thing he can do in the current situation is to be unremarkable. I found I had nothing to say to him that would have served any purpose I valued. So I said nothing. I found I had nothing to say to Rebecca either, except what needed to be said about the apartment and the account. She looked different from how I remembered her, not physically, but in the quality of her attention. She was focused on Ethan in the way that she had once in the early period. Been focused on me, that specific quality of orientation that you notice when it is directed towards someone else and understand in retrospect that you had been experiencing its absence for longer than you admitted. What I felt sitting across from them in the mediation room was not anger and was not sadness. What I felt was the specific sensation of a door closing on a room you have been standing in without quite recognizing it as a room. The click of the latch, the return of the hallway. I drove back north after the second session with the feeling that a certain weight had been properly accounted for and was now being carried by the correct parties. Part 7. The lake in winter. The lake in winter is a different thing from the lake in any other season. In summer, it is visited boats and kayakers, and the family rental periods that Dale had arranged before my arrival, people treating the water as something to be in. In fall, it is theatrical, the trees doing their annual extravagance of colour reflected in still water. In spring, it is tentative and then suddenly insistent. The green returning in a rush that feels like argument. In winter, it is itself. The rental stopped after Thanksgiving. The summer traffic on the county road thinned, the days got short and the light came in low, and the trees held their dark shapes against grey sky. The lake froze in January, a slow process that I watched from the deck over the course of a week, the ice advancing from the shallow north end, thickening, quieting the water's small movements until there was only the occasional sound of the ice adjusting to temperature, a low crack that carried across the frozen surface. I worked during the days. The development framework that I had described to Nora on the phone had grown through our continuing conversation and then our occasional in-person working sessions into something that resembled a product with a market. Nora drove down from Seattle twice in December. We worked at the kitchen table, with the door to the deck cracked despite the cold, because both of us worked better with outside air, and Overture and Coda treated her arrival with the specific excessive enthusiasm that they brought to any novel presence. "This dog is going to knock me into the lake," she said the second time she arrived with Overture's front paws on her shoulders. "He's enthusiastic," I said. "He's 45 pounds and he doesn't know it. He'll calm down eventually, according to the vet," when she gave me an optimistic estimate of 2 years. Nora laughed. She had a specific quality of laughter, sudden, unguarded, then quickly gathered back into her usual composure. I had noticed it on the phone before I met her in person. In person, it was better. At Christmas, my sister Lena drove up from Portland with her husband and their 2 children, who were 8 and 11, and treated the lake cabin as the most interesting place they had ever been. We spent 3 days playing board games and cooking large amounts of food and walking the lake perimeter on the frozen surface, the kids sliding ahead of us. Overture and Coda racing figure eights between the adults. My nephew asked me why I lived here. "Because it's good," I said. "But there's nothing to do." "There's a lot to do," I said. "It's just slower." He considered this. "Like what?" "Making things, thinking about things, learning how the lake changes with the seasons." I looked at the ice under our feet, watching dogs be dogs. He thought about this for a while. Then he said, "That sounds actually okay." It was actually okay. On New Year's Eve, Lena and I sat on the deck after the kids were asleep under enough layers to make the cold manageable watching the lake. There was no fireworks display visible from here, no countdown noise, just the dark water at the edges of the ice where the inlet stayed open, and the stars and the sound of the forest. "Are you going to stay up here?" she asked. "For now," I said. "The business is building. I can work from here. Are you lonely?" I thought about it honestly. Sometimes, but it's different from how I was lonely before. Different how? Before I was lonely inside a life that was supposed to be not lonely. That's worse than just being alone. She was quiet for a moment. That's a pretty good distinction. I've had time to think about it. "Nora seems good," she said. Not aggressively, just noting. "She's a good business partner," I said. "She's smart, and she's honest, and she says what she means." Those are also qualities one might value in a person generally. "Yes," I said, "they are." We watched the lake for a while longer. Part 8. The email exchange. The email exchange started as a professional matter and became something else. Nora and I had been working together formally for 5 months when we had a disagreement about the direction of the product architecture. It was substantive, a genuine difference in how we each saw the core value proposition and which problem we were actually solving. We had a phone call about it that was productive but inconclusive, and she sent me a follow-up email that was the longest single email I had received in years, detailed, argued, honest, and ending with, "I want to understand where you're coming from on this, because I think you might be solving a problem I don't fully see yet. Can you explain it from the beginning?" I wrote back, not the professional explanation, something longer, the origin of the framework in the original observations I had made at Kelmore about how teams talk about product versus how they actually build it, and then further back to a conversation I had had with a colleague 8 years earlier that had stayed with me, and then further back to a course I had taken in graduate school where an instructor had said something I had written on the inside cover of a notebook: "The solution people ask for is rarely the solution they need. Your job is to understand the distance between those two things." Nora wrote back, "It is not a product philosophy, that's a philosophy. And I think it's actually right. How did we end up in this industry?" I wrote, "Honest answer is, I fell into it." "How did you?" She wrote, "Same. But I stayed in it because I found the problems interesting. I think I might be an unusual case of someone who actually likes what the work requires." I wrote, "What does it require?" She wrote, "Attention, patience, the willingness to be wrong about your first analysis and go back. I've noticed that the people who are good at this work treat being wrong the same way they treat being right as information." I wrote, "That's the best description of the work I've ever read. Where did that come from?" She wrote, "From being wrong about a lot of things. Some of them professional, some of them not." There was a pause in the exchange after that. Then she wrote, "Can I ask you something that's not about the product?" I wrote, "Yes." She wrote, "Are you doing all right up there?" "Not fine, actually all right." I wrote, "I'm doing better than I was, better in ways I didn't expect." She wrote, "Better how?" I wrote about the winter, about the lake freezing, about Overture and Coda, about Lena's visit at Christmas and my nephew who had decided the lake was actually okay, about the specific quality of the silence at the lake, which was not the absence of sound, but a different kind of presence. I wrote more than I had intended. She wrote back 3 paragraphs. The first was about her apartment in Seattle, which she had been living in alone since ending a relationship 2 years earlier, and the specific kind of city loneliness that exists when you are surrounded by people and none of them are the right people. The second was about a trip she had taken to the Oregon coast after the relationship ended, where she had sat on the beach for 2 hours and understood with unexpected clarity what she actually needed from life versus what she had been trying to produce. The third paragraph was, "I think we've both been learning the same thing from different directions. What does your version of it look like right now?" I wrote, "Like a frozen lake and 2 dogs and work that I think is actually useful, and conversations with someone who says what they mean." She wrote, "I'll tell you mine next time I see you." She came down from Seattle 2 weeks later. We worked all day. After dinner on the deck with the cold air and the lake dark below, she told me her version. It sounded in the specific details and in the larger shape of it like someone who had made different choices than I had, but arrived at a similar understanding of what those choices had cost and what they had clarified. She talked for 40 minutes, and I listened, and Overture sat between our chairs and occasionally put his chin on one of our knees to confirm the situation. "That dog," she said. "He takes his emotional support role very seriously," I said. "Does he know he's doing it?" "I genuinely don't know. He seems to." She laughed the sudden unguarded version. Then she looked at me and said, "James, I need to tell you something." "Tell me." "I've been thinking about what we're building, the company, and I want it to work. I want it to be real. And I've also been thinking about something else, which is that I like talking to you more than anyone I've talked to in a long time, and I don't want to create a problem in the work situation by naming that. But I also don't want to not name it and have it be the thing that's sitting in the room not being named." I looked at the lake. "I've been thinking the same thing," I said. "Okay," she said. "Good to know. What do we do with it?" "I don't know yet. I wanted to say it first. The rest we figure out." Overture's tail thumped once on the deck boards. "He's voting," I said. "He's biased," she said. "He likes me because I bring cheese. He's easily influenced," I said. "Also, he's right." She laughed again. We sat like that for a while, looking at the lake, and neither of us said anything else that night about the thing that had been named. But it was named now, and naming things I had learned in the past year was the beginning of being able to handle them correctly. Part 9. What Got Built. Callaway Elgin Solutions launched in March of the following year with 2 clients, a product framework that Nora and I had spent 5 months refining, and a website that we had built ourselves over 2 weekends at the lake cabin. By June, we had 6 clients. By September, 12. The framework I had protected in those notebooks for 3 years, the one that had been slowly accumulating in the margins of a job that stopped listening, had found a market that was considerably more interested than I had expected. The work was real, the problems were interesting, the business was functioning. I continued to live at the lake cabin. Dale, after the first year, offered to sell me a portion of the property, the cabin and 2 acres, at a price that reflected his genuine preference that someone who cared about the place should own part of it. I bought it with the severance money and a small business loan, because owning the land under the cabin felt like the right expression of what the year had been. The water heater, which had failed the month before my arrival, I replaced myself. It took 3 days and 3 trips to the hardware store in town and 1 extended phone conversation with Dale, who walked me through the plumbing from Bend with the patience of a man who had done everything himself for 40 years. The deck needed new boards. I put them in over a summer weekend. Nora helped with the sections she could reach. The kitchen needed a new window. I found one at a salvage yard and spent a Saturday installing it with a tutorial video and the specific stubbornness of a person who has decided that not knowing how to do something is not a permanent condition. These repairs were not metaphors. They were repairs. But they were also the education of a person who had spent his professional life building things that existed only in software and meetings and presentations, and who was learning 1 water heater and 1 deck board and 1 window at a time what it meant to fix something that you could put your hands on. Part 10. The Loon. The loons returned in May. I had not known about the loons when I arrived in October. The lake was empty of them in winter. Sometime in late April, the first one appeared floating near the inlet, its black and white pattern vivid against the grey water, calling in the specific way that loon calls carry across a lake, unlike any other sound in nature. Long sliding, somehow both lonely and companionable. By May, there were 3. By June, a breeding pair had established a territory at the far end of the lake and was navigating the logistics of raising 2 chicks that I watched periodically through binoculars from the deck. Overture and Coda were fascinated by the loons in the unfocused way that dogs are fascinated by things they can perceive but not access. They would sit on the dock and watch with the devoted attention of scientists who lack the instruments to test their hypotheses. Nora came for a long weekend in late June. We took the kayaks out Dale had left, 2 old fiberglass boats that rode well and leaked minimally, and paddled to the breeding pair's end of the lake, where we sat for 40 minutes at a respectful distance and watched the adult pair moving through their patterns and the 2 chicks bobbing in their wake. They mate for life, loons, Nora said. I've heard that, I said. How does that work for them evolutionarily? Better outcomes for the chicks, I think. Both parents present longer. Coordination advantage. There's a business model in there somewhere, I said. She looked at me. You just tried to find a business application in a monogamous bird. I'm always working. So am I apparently, because I'm now trying to figure out what the product metaphor is. It's about sustained attention. When I said, the advantage of staying. She was quiet for a moment. Yeah, she said. I think it is. We paddled back in the evening light, the lake going copper-coloured with the sun on its way down the loons calling behind us as we went. The calls overlapped and echoed off the tree line, and came back changed by the distance, the way all things come back changed by the distance. Part 11. A note on the broken plate. There is a way that people talk about healing from betrayal that I find incomplete. The way the story usually goes, you were broken, you healed, now you are whole again. The implication being that the goal of the process is restoration, the recovery of the person you were before the break, the resumption of the life you had before the interruption. I don't think that's what happens. Or at least, it's not what happened for me. What happened was something more like this: the life I had in Portland, the relationship and the job and the apartment and the specific arrangements of each of those things was a structure I had built over years out of reasonable materials with genuine effort. It was solid in most places. It had problems I had not fully acknowledged. When it failed because of those problems. And because of things outside my control, and because of choices that were not mine to make and were made by other people without my knowledge. The structure is gone. It's not coming back. Not because I don't want it, but because you can't rebuild the same structure from the same materials after a foundational failure. The materials are changed by the failure. The foundation is changed. Even if you tried to put it back together, what you would get would be a different thing wearing the face of the old one. What you can do is build something new with what you learned on ground you've actually tested. That's not a metaphor. Or it is a metaphor, but it's one that describes something real. The product framework I developed at Callaway Elgin was built from 3 years of thinking that happened in the margins of a job that wouldn't take it seriously. The cabin I live in was built out of a year's caretaking on someone else's land. The understanding of what I actually need from a person I share my life with was built out of 5 years of needing something I couldn't name, and then in the aftermath of losing it, finally being able to name it. Nora and I are not the same as who we were when we were 28 and working at a startup that failed in an uninteresting way. We are not the people we were in the years between then and now. What we are is two people who understand with the specific clarity that only comes from having been through the wrong things what the right things feel like. That's not restoration. That's not the old plate repaired. That's something built from scratch on ground we walked to on our own. Part 12. What the Lake Teaches. It is October again. A year past to the October that started everything. I am on the deck with coffee, watching the lake go through its morning transition grey, then silver, then as the sun clears the tree line, a colour that doesn't have a good name in English, a blue gold that shifts as you look at it. Overture is asleep in the doorway behind me, one front paw extended onto the deck boards. Coda is investigating something at the edge of the water. Nora is inside making a second pot of coffee. She drove down from Seattle on Thursday, and she doesn't drive back until Monday. This has been the arrangement since February, when we both understood that the arrangement was the right one for now and stopped pretending it was provisional. She appears in the doorway with the second pot. "The dog is going to eat a frog," she says. "He does that sometimes," I say. "He's fine after." "James, he's a dog. It's educational." She comes out, pause, sits in the other chair. We are quiet for a while watching the lake. The loons are gone for the winter. They will be back in May. I know this now. "Can I ask you something?" she says. "Yes. Do you miss Portland?" I think about it. Not the reflexive answer, but the real one. I miss certain things, the restaurants, the infrastructure, Lena being 30 minutes away. I pause. I don't miss the life I was living there. There's a difference between a place and a life. "Yes," I say, "I know that now." She holds her cup in both hands, looking at the water. "What did this year teach you?" I think about that for a long time, long enough that the light on the lake changes twice. That the things you build when no one is watching are usually the things worth keeping, I say. The notebooks, the framework, the understanding of what I was actually trying to do. I pause. And that the right person is not the person who finds you at your best. It's the person who is interested in the work. She looks at me. That's specific. "It's what I've got." "I'll take it," she says. Overture wakes up and comes to lean against my leg. Coda has abandoned the frog investigation and is standing at the edge of the dock looking at the water with the focused expression of a dog who is seriously considering a bad idea. "Coda," I say. He looks at me, looks at the water, looks at me. "Don't," I say. He looks at the water one more time. Then he turns and trots back towards the deck with the air of a dog who has decided this one time not to do the thing he was going to do, but who reserves the right to revisit the decision. Nora laughs, the sudden unguarded version. "He's reconsidering," she says. "He's learning," I say, which is more than most. The light on the lake has settled into its mid-morning clarity. The forest on the far shore is beginning its annual colour shift, a few trees turning already ahead of the season, the specific orange and gold that the maples do first, always early, always certain as if they have already understood something the rest of the forest will come to on its own schedule. I built a life here, not the life I had planned and not the life I lost. A different one made from scratch on tested ground, with a person who says what they mean, and a dog named for second chances. The broken plate is gone. What's here instead is better, not because it has no breaks in it, because it was built knowing that breaks are possible and built anyway. That's what the lake teaches. Season by season, you watch things end and come back. The loons leave, the ice comes, the ice breaks, the loons return. It's not the same lake. It's not the same ice. It's not the same spring. It's something that keeps going, which is enough. It is, as a matter of fact, everything. The end. Cast of characters. James Calloway, Director of Product Development. Former, age 38. Portland, Oregon, then North. Built a framework in notebooks for 3 years that no one at his company would listen to. Found that things become clearer when you stop carrying them inside a life that is going wrong. Rebecca Senior, Art Director, James's girlfriend of 5 years. Her first question after being discovered was, "What the fuck are you doing home?" This is not a small thing. She is not a villain. She is someone who had already left a relationship before telling the person she was in it with. That's a specific kind of damage. Ethan Corso, Creative Director, EC. He attended the mediation session as Rebecca's support person. He looked at the floor. Nora Elgin, Consultant, Seattle. James's former colleague from a failed startup. Built something real on her own. Drove down from Seattle. Said the true thing instead of the easy thing. Brought cheese for the dog. Overture Australian Shepherd, mix grey and white. Found in a cardboard box on a county road. Named for beginnings. Will knock you off your feet if you come through the door. Coda mixed breed black with one white ear. Found in the same cardboard box. Named for the ending that makes the beginning possible. Is always considering jumping into the lake and occasionally doesn't. Dale Whitmore, 63, former timber industry, owner of the lake property, patient with plumbing explanations, made the right call on the caretaker. Patricia Walsh, James's attorney. Available, correct. Lena, James's sister. Portland, 2 kids, drove up at Christmas, asked the right questions, let him answer them. Dr. Sulin Park, veterinarian, 22 years, practical, warm. Told James the puppies would probably be fine. Part 13, The Family Conversation. Lena called me in November, the month after I moved to the lake, on a Sunday evening, when the lake was doing its early dusk performance and I was on the deck with a beer and both dogs asleep inside. She called because she was my sister, and she had been watching the past month with the specific contained concern of someone who is trying to give you the room you need while also wanting to confirm that you are using the room correctly. "Tell me how you actually are," she said, "not how are you, which is a social formula with a predetermined acceptable response. Tell me how you actually are," I told her. I told her about the morning at Kelmore, the cardboard box, the elevator with Marcus, and then the apartment, and Rebecca's first question, and Ethan Corso's jacket in the hallway with the monogrammed pin. I told her about stripping the bedding and carrying it to the dumpster. I told her about sitting at the kitchen counter with the beer for 2 hours before I ate anything. I told her about the keycard still warm from Rebecca's pocket pressing into my palm. Lena was quiet for a long time after I finished. "I want to say something," she said, "and I want you to hear it as what it actually is, which is not comfort. Say it. I've been watching you and Rebecca for 4 years, and I have not told you what I saw because it was not my place and because you seemed not happy exactly, but stable. And I decided that stable was enough for me to say nothing." A pause. "I should have said something." "What would you have said?" "That she never looked at you the way you looked at her. That when you were in a room together, she was always looking at the edge of the room, checking for something else, and that you were always looking at her. Another pause. That asymmetry is not something you can maintain indefinitely. It puts all the risk on one person. I sat with that for a while. The lake was going dark. The first stars were coming out above the tree line. I saw it. I said finally, I just didn't call it by the right name. What did you call it? Distance, stress, the accumulation of a long relationship finding its equilibrium. I paused. I called it things that let me not call it what it was. You were being generous, she said. You were giving her the interpretation she deserved to receive, rather than the one the evidence actually supported. Yes, that's not a character flaw, Lena said. That's love deployed incorrectly. Love deployed incorrectly, I said. That's a very specific phrase. I've been thinking about it for a month, she said, since I heard what happened. She paused. Love is only useful if it's accurate. If you love someone more than the evidence supports, you're not loving them. You're loving an idea of them. And you end up carrying all the weight of both versions, the real one and the one you've invented. And eventually the real one becomes indistinguishable from the invented one, and you don't know what you actually had. I was quiet for a long time. How did you figure that out? I asked. From watching the two of you, she said, and from a few mistakes of my own that I've never told you about. Tell me sometime. Sometime, she agreed. Not tonight. Tonight is yours. We talked for another hour about things that had nothing to do with Rebecca, about her kids, about a renovation she and her husband were planning, about a book she was reading. The ordinary texture of a sibling relationship that holds you up by simply being present and uninterrupted. After we hung up, I sat on the deck for a long time in the dark, with the lake invisible below me, except for the occasional glint of starlight on its surface. I thought about love deployed incorrectly, about the specific blindness of giving someone the benefit of every doubt over years until the doubts have accumulated into something you can no longer explain away. I thought about what it would mean to love someone in a way that was accurate, that saw them as they actually were and loved that the real version, not the version assembled from optimistic interpretation. That required seeing clearly, which required removing from the equation the deep human preference for the comfortable interpretation. I thought about that for a long time. Then I went inside and made dinner, and Overture got off the couch to be sociable, and Coda discovered that something interesting had happened in the corner near the wood stove, and investigated it with the complete focus that only dogs bring to unimportant things. The lake kept going outside. The stars were very bright. I wrote in my notebook for an hour before I went to sleep. Not about Rebecca or Kelmore or any of it. About the product framework, which had grown 3 new branches in the past week of thinking, and which was beginning to feel, for the first time, like something that could actually hold. Part 14, what Nora said the second time. The second time Nora came to the lake was a Saturday in January. She arrived in the late morning after driving through a forecast that had threatened snow, but had produced only the specific grey-white sky that holds snow in reserve, while making everyone aware of the possibility. She pulled in with a bag of groceries and 2 bottles of wine, and the contained energy of someone who has been driving alone for 2 hours and thinking the whole way. We worked through the afternoon on the product architecture. It was good work, the kind that builds on itself, where each solved piece reveals the shape of the next one, where the conversation itself is part of the thinking. By 5 o'clock, we had produced more in a single session than we had in the previous 3 weeks of email and phone calls. I'm convinced the reason this works, she said, looking at the whiteboard I had hung in the main room specifically for these sessions, is that we're both willing to say when something is wrong. Most people aren't. Most people protect their ideas too much. They mistake the idea for the self. So attacking the idea feels like being attacked. She looked at the board. You don't do that. When I say something is wrong, you think about it and then you tell me if you agree or if you have a counter and why. That's rarer than it should be. It helps that the work is interesting enough that being right about it matters more than feeling right about it. That's the whole thing, she said. That's the whole thing right there. We ate dinner at the kitchen table and talked about things that weren't the work. She told me about a friendship she had been managing carefully for 2 years, a close friend whose relationship had been ending slowly and painfully, and who had needed a great deal of Nora's emotional presence during the process. She told me she had given that presence willingly and without resentment, but that it had left her aware of how much of her own life she had been holding in reserve during the period of being necessary to someone else. Reserve is a good word for it, I said. You know what I mean. I spent 5 years in something that was in some ways a well-managed partnership. Everything functional, everything split evenly, not enough that was actual. I paused. I kept things in reserve too. I told myself it was appropriate not to bring everything to the table, that some things were mine to carry alone. I looked at my wine glass. I don't think that was right. Why not? Because the person you're with is supposed to be the person you can put things down with. Not all things, but the ones that are heaviest. I paused. I never put anything down with Rebecca. I managed my own weight and occasionally asked if she was okay. Nora was quiet for a moment. Was she okay? I don't know, I said. I didn't ask the right way. I asked to perform the checking in, not because I expected or would have tolerated a real answer. I paused. I think we were both performing a relationship rather than having one, and neither of us named it, and that's how you get to a Tuesday morning. Performing a relationship, she said, versus having one. Yes. She held her wine glass and thought about that for a while. Outside, the first snow had started light and tentative, visible in the beam of the porch light. I think I've performed several, she said finally. What's the difference when you're inside it? I think the difference is whether you feel seen, she said. Not flattered, not appreciated in the abstract, actually seen. Like the specific person you are is the thing the other person has noticed and decided they want to be around. She paused. I've had versions of the other thing. The appreciation that is actually appreciation of the role you're playing. The affection that has been extended to whoever fits this category. Not to me, specifically. Yes, I said, that's exactly it. But we looked at each other across the kitchen table with the snow coming down outside and both dogs asleep in a pile near the wood stove. I want to be seen, she said, not in a complicated way, just accurately. Me too, I said. The snow came down, the wood stove ticked, the dogs breathed. That was the night the thing that had been building without being named resolved itself into a decision that neither of us announced but both of us made. Not a conversation, just a direction. The kind that arrives when two people have said enough true things in the same room that the next true thing is simply being in the same room. Part 15, the commentary. I want to say something about what Rebecca's betrayal actually cost, because I think the way these stories usually get told puts the cost in the wrong place. The usual accounting goes, she cheated, I lost the relationship, it hurt, I rebuilt. The cost is framed as the loss of the relationship and the subsequent pain of the rebuilding. The betrayal is the wound and the healing is the resolution. That's not the full ledger. What Rebecca's betrayal actually cost was this 18 months of trust that I had been extending without adequate information. The cost of love deployed incorrectly is not just the discovery moment. It's every morning before the discovery when you chose on insufficient evidence to continue believing in a version of the situation that was not accurate. The discovery does not create the cost retroactively. It reveals a cost that had been accumulating all along. You gave something real to something that was not real. That's the cost. And it's not just money or time, it's attention, care, the specific emotional labor of being present in a relationship. All of it given to a structure that was already compromised. But here is what I have come to believe about that cost after a year at this lake. It is not wasted. The attention I paid, the care I gave the presents, I tried to bring those things were real regardless of whether they were received correctly. They were mine. They came from somewhere in me that knew how to do those things. And knowing how to do those things is what I brought eventually to a kitchen table in January with snow coming down and a woman who was interested in accuracy. The old structure is gone. The materials were not wasted. They became something else, something that I understand now in a way I would not have understood without the years that built the understanding. That is not comfort. That is not reassurance. That is just the honest accounting of what happened and what it produced. The broken plate is gone. What's on the table now is better for being made from scratch by two people who understood what they were making. The last thing. The loons came back in April. I was on the deck with my first coffee of the morning when I heard the call from across the lake, the long, sliding, haunting note that carries across water the way nothing else does. I sat up and looked, and there was a single loon floating near the inlet, making the sound that had seemed lonely in the fall, and something else now. Overture came to the deck door and looked at the lake and then at me, assessing the situation. "Loons are back," I said. He appeared to accept this information and retreated inside. By May, there were 3. The breeding pair returned to their end of the lake, and the season began its cycle again, the chicks appearing in June, both parents working the water in their precise patterns, the calls carrying at dawn and at dusk across the lake. Nora drove down in June. We took the kayaks to the breeding pair's territory and watched from a distance the way you have to, the way you should, the way that shows the right amount of interest without taking up too much of their particular water. "They came back," she said. "They always come back," I said. "This is where they're from." She looked at the water for a while. "Is this where you're from now?" I thought about it. Portland, which I had moved to at 26 with a job offer and a carload of boxes. The apartment that had felt like mine for 7 years and that now belonged to someone else. The lake cabin on 14 acres that had belonged to Dale's family for 40 years and that I had made into the place I came back to. "I think so," I said. "I think I'm from here now." She looked at me. The late June light was on the water and on her face, and she had the specific expression of someone who is about to say something true. "I want to be from here too," she said, eventually. "Okay," I said. We paddled back in the long June evening. The loons called behind us. The calls went across the lake to the far shore and came back, changed by the distance. The way all things come back changed by the distance. My house was lit from inside when we landed on the shore. The wood stove that I had learned to operate correctly over a winter and a spring. The desk where the work happened, the whiteboard with the current version of the architecture, the kitchen table, the 2 dogs inside, both claiming the couch with the specific moral certainty of dogs who have decided that they live on the couch and are tolerating your presence in the house. Inside, behind us, the lake going copper and then silver and then black, the loons settling into their evening calls. It didn't sound lonely anymore. That's the whole story, or it's the part of the story that has a shape so far. The rest is being written in the usual way, one day at a time, one true thing at a time, on ground that has been tested. I'll be here when you come back. We both will. A note on what I actually learned. People who have been through something like this, the specific double loss of the same Tuesday morning job and relationship in the same 9-hour window, often describe it as a turning point. The thing that changed everything, the before and after of their life. I want to be more precise than that. What changed was not my life in the dramatic sense. My life is in many ways structurally similar to what it was. I work in product development. I am in a relationship. I live in a place I chose. The furniture is different, the geography is different, the specific people are different. What changed was my relationship with accuracy. I had been, for most of my adult professional life, very good at being accurate about external things, about products, markets, problems, frameworks, the distance between what people said they wanted and what they actually needed. That was the skill I was paid for, and that I practiced and refined. I was considerably less accurate about internal things, about what I wanted, about what I was getting, about whether the life I was living and the relationship I was in were actually what they appeared to be, or whether I was extending the benefit of the doubt across a gap that had been growing wider than the doubt could bridge. The October morning removed the benefit of the doubt as a structural option. When you hear what I heard through a cracked bedroom door and see what I saw on the bathroom counter and receive what I received as a first response, the gap becomes impossible to bridge by interpretation. What's there is what's there. That precision, the forced accuracy of a morning that would not allow any other reading, was what I drove north with. And what I found at the end of the drive was a life that required accuracy in a different way. Not the accuracy of a product framework, the accuracy of knowing what the lake needed from me as a caretaker, of knowing what the dogs needed, of knowing what the work needed, of knowing eventually what Nora meant when she said she wanted to be seen accurately and not in the abstract. The broken plate is a useful metaphor, but incomplete. The better version, the one I have actually lived, is this: you had a structure. It failed. The failure revealed something about the structure that was always true, but that you had not been looking at directly. The materials are gone, but the education, the specific, costly, difficult education of understanding what the failure was actually about, remains. You take the education north. You drive until the road gets honest. You find a lake and some dogs and a person who means what they say. You build something new, not from the old materials, but from the new understanding. You name the dog Overture. You begin. The shaving detail. One more time. I keep coming back to it because I think it matters beyond what it meant to me personally, and I want to say one more thing about it before I stop. The specific detail, what she had done for someone else that she had never done for me in 5 years, is not important because of what it is. It is important because of what it represents: evidence of effort directed elsewhere. The willingness to try to prepare, to invest attention and care and intention in something. That willingness existed. It was not absent from her. It was present. Working applied, just not in my direction. I have thought about this a great deal in the past year, and what I have arrived at is this: the absence of that effort in my direction was not about me, or not entirely about me. It was about the relationship, the specific accumulated weight of a relationship that had not been tended correctly, that had been allowed to become a structure that functioned but did not feel, that had developed the particular comfort of familiarity as a substitute for the more demanding discomfort of actual intimacy. I was part of that process. She was more part of it. But the point is that the detail was not evidence of my inadequacy. It was evidence of a relationship that had stopped being a place where either of us was bringing our best attention. The lesson I take from it is not be better, so your partner will shave for you. The lesson I take from it is build relationships where both people are directing their best attention at the relationship itself, not at the performance of the relationship, not at the maintenance of the structure, at the actual living thing. When that's happening, the details take care of themselves. The effort is present because the desire is present, because the attention is present. You don't have to manufacture it. You don't have to wonder whether it's there. You feel it in the way two people are in a room together, in the way they look at each other across a kitchen table in January with snow coming down and dogs asleep by the wood stove. That's the difference between a relationship and a well-managed partnership. I know the difference now. That knowledge cost something real. It was worth what it cost. Overture is awake on the deck watching the lake. Nora is inside on the phone with a client, her voice carrying the specific focused warmth that she brings to things she cares about. The loons will be back in May. The work is good. The ground has been tested. We're building. One more thing and then I'm done. The loon call, the one that didn't sound lonely anymore. I have been thinking about why it changed. Why the same sound produced by the same birds on the same lake in the same physical space sounds different now than it did the first time I heard it. The sound didn't change. The loon doesn't know about my Tuesday morning or my drive north or Nora or the email exchange or the dogs or any of it. The loon is just doing what loons do, calling across the lake, because that's the call, that's the sound this particular life makes. What changed is the way I was hearing it. The first time I was alone in the specific way of a person whose aloneness is involuntary, a person who has had things removed from them and is standing in the aftermath of the removal. The loon call went into that space and came back as loneliness because that was the frequency I was tuned to receive. Now I hear it differently. Not because the loneliness is gone, it visits sometimes the way all real things visit briefly and usefully, but because the frequency I'm tuned to now includes other things, the work that has built into something real, the person inside who says what she means, the dogs who are always glad to see anyone walk through the door, which is a quality of character I aspire to. The loon calls across the lake. It comes back from the far shore, having travelled the distance and returned, changed. That's not a metaphor for loneliness. That's just what it sounds like when you're finally listening from the right place. I needed to go north to find the right place. Your direction may be different, but if you're standing in the wreckage of a Tuesday morning that took everything at once, the job and the relationship and the version of yourself that believed in both, I'll tell you what I would tell myself, which is this: drive until the road gets honest. Find the ground worth building on. Name the dog Overture. Begin. It gets better. Not back to what it was. Better than that. Better because it's true. The lake is waiting. The loons know the way. Go north if you need to. The distance will teach you something the stillness couldn't. That's the whole point of the drive.